Welcome to the podcast, Whiskey and a Map. Stories of adventure and expeditions as told by those who live them. I'm your host, Michael Reinhart. It has been said that many adventures and expeditions start simply with a map and a glass of whiskey. A desire to go and see the world's wild places. You're invited to pull up a chair, pour yourself a glass of your favorite whiskey, and join us as we hear stories from another one of our friends just returned from the field. West, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Michael. As they say, and they're usually very accurate, it's wonderful to be here.
Appreciate having the opportunity to talk to you again. We are going to talk to you about an epic expedition. You had sort of titled it The Farthest Journey Down the Longest River, and that's your Amazon trip from source to sea. When I was getting ready for this podcast, I listened to a few of your interviews. There was one with a podcast dedicated to the paddling community. And it was funny because in the introduction, this guy, he's talking to his co-host. He goes, West Hansen, he's the man. He's the man. So,
oh, yeah, those were the guys up in Canada. Yeah, they were kind of funny. We actually, it's funny you talk about drinking stories in this podcast. We actually went out drinking in Ottawa with those guys and had a blast. I mean, then we ended up on scooters after drinking a lot going through downtown Ottawa.
Yeah, they sounded fun.
They were.
Speaking of drinking stories, as is the tradition here at Whiskey and Map, we always require our guests to come in and tell us a good drinking story. Do you have one for us? Well,
I've got. I had to narrow it down. There are quite a few drinking stories that I might be able to add. However, I'm going to tell a drinking story about two people that were on our expedition that weren't me actually, and it's because they had a really exciting time in the middle of the Amazon rainforest. We had just made it through the red zone where the Ine and Tambo River ended up spilling into another river and make up the Ucayali River. We were in the town of Atalaya. And this is at the end of a very tense section of the Amazon region where the narco traffickers produce their cocaine into paste and ship it out to places in order to make their product to sell to all parts of the world. And you would think that an insidious, illegal drug like this, such an area would be chaotic. But the narco traffickers have what are called rondero, which are their own private police force to maintain their laws and order in their area. So this is an extremely beautiful and lush area in the cloud forest, actually, in southern Peru, as the Amazon winds its way out of the mountains into the flatlands. And the Rondero keep a very tight rein on anybody coming into the area. So we had to get written permission in the town of Puerto Prado from the alcalde, or the mayor, written permission testifying that we were not part of the police force, the military or the CIA or anybody that's going to cause any problem with the narco trafficking throughout there. And we had our paperwork, and we were told to check into a couple of different little settlements along the way as we made our way down the Tambo River to Atalaya. It's about, an 80-mile trip, I would say, and through this very desolate area. And so we made our first little checkpoint, and then we're coming to the last checkpoint in the little town of Puyene. And it was the end of the day. There was mist coming out of the green foliage, which was thick. And it was just very peaceful and beautiful. I remember thinking that at the time, this has got to be one of the most wonderful places on the planet, because it was quiet except for the wildlife. The water was clean and pure, and it was just idyllic. Well, then we pulled up to Puyene, and by the time we got there, our National Geographic photographer, Eric Schlegel, and who was in a powerboat. We were all in kayaks, the five of us paddlers, and our friend Jason Jones, an ex-Marine from Texas, were there with the captain of the boat they had hired to follow us through the red zone. And there were a whole bunch of gunmen surrounding them on the bank of little town of Puyenne. I pulled up on my kayak, and Jason Jones, who I had known since college, walks up to me, and everything is very quiet. And I said, "Hey, how's it going, guys?" We're always friendly with everybody around there. And he mumbles to me, and which I thought was kind of strange because no one around us spoke English, but he mumbles to me in English, says, "Things are a little tense. We got shot at, and we're waiting on the boss." And I said, "Oh, great. This is just great." I said, "Was anybody hit?" And he said, "No, we're all right, but things are tense." Well, I had my GoPro camera going on at the time, and I left it on. In fact, I set it on the deck of my kayak as I got out and kept my hands free and didn't make any sudden movements. And these are all boys. I mean, these are all kids. And I'd say there are about 20 of them around us, all with single shot 20 gauge shotguns. But being kids, I don't necessarily trust their judgment. We were raised around guns in Texas a lot, and we know probably more than we should about firearms, and we're probably a lot more comfortable around it than the rest of the world. Not that we're big proponents, but at the same time, we do know what we're doing. And these boys, we didn't want them accidentally shooting us, just because they're nervous, because these are the first, peeled faces that they've seen. Pellicata, as we were known down there. So we're being calm and nice and friendly and smiles all around, smile and wave, boys. And eventually, the head Rondero guy shows up. He looks like a banker. He's got a polo shirt on, a shotgun over his arm, and a briefcase, and glasses perched on the tip of his nose. And he sorts out our paper, and he figures we're okay. And then he goes to the captain of the little boat that Eric Schlegel, our photographer, had hired. And the captain doesn't like being shaken down by the local narco traffickers. And he kind of puts up a little protest, and finally the guy offers him enough threat that he comes up with his paperwork, and he's got his paperwork. It's in order, so we're okay. The guy just didn't like being, having a kowtow or answer to the narco traffickers. Anyway, we're all fine, and the head dude welcomes us in, and we're protected, and we have a great night in Puyenne, and the gun boys, are now guarding us. They're on our side, and they're going to make sure our boats aren't messed with and that we're treated well. And that's probably the safest we ever felt in Peru, was when we were guarded by the narco traffickers. Well, everything's fine, and we leave the next day, and we get down to Atalaya, where we're departing the red zone, and kayakers are worn out because we've been kayaking quite a bit. We find a night in a hostel, and we ate a big dinner, and we're heading to bed, right as the sun goes down, because we're wiped out. Well, Eric and Jason's down there to help Eric out, because we're all old friends, decided to go out drinking with the mayor of Atalaya and this local DJ, Miguel, who speaks pretty okay English, but he's the AM voice of the jungle down there. AM radio is how they get the news out to all these people out there with just a battery-operated radio. This is the only communication most of them have. It's not like they can fire up their Wi-Fi or broadband and check on what's going on with the world. So this guy, Miguel, is on Radio Ucayale. But he's this character that knows everybody, so he kind of gloms onto us. Plus, he has a back problem, which makes him changes his personality in that he can't pick up a bill or a check anywhere. It just hurts his back too much. So whenever they go out drinking or we go out for a meal, oh man, I'm sorry, that's just too heavy. I can't get that. So the guy figured out where he could get a free meal, and so he gloms on to Eric and Jason, and the mayor is just thrilled to have us coming through the town and reporting on how beautiful the town of Atalaya is. And they end up going from bar to bar and drinking, and finally the mayor calls it a night somewhere around the middle of the night, and then Eric and Jason and Miguel end up going to strip clubs. Well, there are quite a few little strip huts or bars in these towns along the way. And, disco music blaring, and they end up in this one, and there's this one stripper in there that everybody just loves. Apparently she puts on quite a show. And her deal is she drags somebody out of the audience, and she's naked, and she puts a blindfold on them, and they strip them down. Well, Eric was the one. He's this big old white guy that's kind of standing out in the middle of the crowd. And Eric's not there's not a lot of wallflowers among our crowd, so Eric's kind of fits right in. Not the studious type. And so, the crowd's going crazy, and they drag Eric up on top of the bar, and she blindfolds him with a bandana, the stripper, and she's totally naked. And she starts stripping down. The music's going great. And it's just and they've been drinking a long time by now. Eric, as they say, adult beverages were involved. And she gets Eric all stripped down. and I think at that point, she's not used to encountering someone like Eric, shall we say. And a shock ensued, and probably a lot different reaction than she normally gets. So she ended up pouring a bunch of cold beer all over Eric to change the reaction, shall we say. and he was covered with beer and naked, and eventually they just, instead of anything horribly worse happening in front of everybody, he ended up back in the crowd, and they put his clothes on, and a sense of normality was recovered. Well, that's when things started getting a little crazy, because they were drinking and dancing and hanging out a lot in the gal, and they were making friends with everybody there, and that's when Jason, our ex-Marine friend, by the way, Jason I met in Taekwondo in college. Jason was really good at it. And then he went into the Marines and got jungle training and got good at a lot of other things. Jason is someone you want to have on your side. If Chuck Norris and Jimmy Buffett had a love child, that would be Jason Jones. He's the perfect combination of all the above. You want him on your side. So it's then that Jason recognized about 4 or 5 of the gun boys that had fired at them the day before in Ployeni. They were on the other side of the bar. Now, these bars are places where you check your guns at the door, because they have a lot of problems when people start drinking. You check your guns and machetes. Everybody down there carries a machete. And so these gun boys were all of a sudden without their guns. And Jason, who had a few under his belt, recognized them, especially the one that shot at their boat. Now, Jason doesn't like to be shot at. I mean, most of us, are very opposed to it. But Jason has a special place in his gut about being shot at. He took it personal. Took it very personally. So he goes after all 4 of these guys. And they recognized him, too. It's not like he could hide in the crowd. So Jason just goes headlong like a bull with a fever after these boys. And, man, I tell you what, everybody jumped on. Eric grabbed Jason, Miguel grabbed Jason, and everybody basically had to hold him down while the guys had a chance to escape, because Jason was going to tear them up. He was livid. And they did have a chance to escape finally, by the way. Well, then it got weirder. They still had the mayor's vehicle.
Oh, what could go wrong?
What could go wrong in this jungle town? And the way I heard it the next morning, we're all standing out there in the bright sunlight about 9 a.m. waiting to go, and Jason hobbles out of the hostel looking like a ghost. I mean, he looked like Dracula, in Miami. He looked like hell. He had the sunglasses on and kind of stumbled out of the hostel, and we said, "Hey, where's everybody else?" He said, "We're gonna have to catch up with you in a day or two. We're really not. We had a rough night." And I said, "Well, what happened?" "Well, we first have to talk to the mayor about the fact that we drove his vehicle into the Amazon River too. So we have to deal with that, and we've got to straighten some things out with the police, and it's like we're gonna have to get okay, that's fine." And
somebody had a really good time.
They had a great time. So that's one of our drinking stories.
In your book, you described seeing him when he actually came out in the sunlight. You described almost seeing puffs of smoke coming out from the alcohol still burning off, and you thought he was going to spontaneously combust.
He did look very volatile there. We didn't want to get too near him, but he was vapors were emanating from him. I mean, it's kind of warm down there in the jungle, and it was not getting along with whatever level of alcohol was circulating in his system.
Well, they must have been good talkers, because they made it out of there.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure. Like I said, there's not a lot of wallflowers in the crowd in which we hang out, and these 2 guys are no exception. They don't need to wait for an invitation, or they're not going to wait for anybody to save them either. So they made it out alive.
Yeah, but good people to have in that territory.
Definitely people you want on our side.
Now, Wes, I'm going to change gears a little bit on you. Talk about your career as an ultra-marathon paddler and racer, and especially about something called the Texas Water Safari.
Yeah, the Texas Water Safari is our bread and butter down here. It's a canoe and kayak race that's been going on since 1962, roughly. I guess the year I was born. And they missed 1 year for COVID, but it's been happening the second Saturday of every June for the past, 30 or 40 years. But it's going into its 61st annual race this year. And it's a race that was developed geographically apart from all the other canoe and kayak racing in the nation. So we build our own boats for the most part to be tough enough to get through the first 90 miles, which tears up a lot of boats. It's a rough course. It's not known as the world's toughest boat race because of the distance. It's 260 miles, but because how difficult the course is to run. First 90 miles is full of shallows and rapids and rebar and dams to portage, and it's a lot of hairpin turns. It's just a very rough course to paddle. And then you have gunnel-to-gunnel boats barking at each other throughout that entire first day. And then you end up with fairly flat river water on the Guadalupe all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico. And then right before you get to the Gulf, there's about 50 miles of swamp you have to make your way through. And it's easy to get lost in there. In fact, right in the middle of one of the swamps is a place that's appropriately called Alligator Lake. And it is chock full of alligators. A lot of people think about Florida. Oh no, we got a lot of alligators in Texas. In fact, they were a lot bigger than any ones I saw in the Amazon, that's for sure.
You also have something down there, the alligator gar. That was particularly nasty.
Alligator gar are a lot more aggressive than the alligators, and they get 12 to 15 feet long also, and they are very aggressive. They'll come and ram your boat if they see a light at night, because this race goes 24 hours. We've got these big old bright lights in the front of our bows, and these gar will come slamming into people. I had a friend of mine, she was in a 3-person boat with her sisters, and they had a headlight on their head. One of them did, I think it was Khaki, her sister, and this 4-footer just leapt out of the water straight for her head, hit her in the ribs, broke her ribs, and they had to limp down to the next checkpoint a few miles, and she ended up in the hospital. And then she's in the ER. She's trying to tell the doctor about how she got the injury, and so he thought the way she looked after being awake for 2 days of paddling, he thought she was drunk. And she had to keep saying, no, a fish jumped out of the water and broke my ribs. No. So when you fell down while you were fishing, no, I didn't fall down while I was fishing. It took a while for her to get the story across. But those gar, man, they will raise the bow of your boat. They will freak you out because they don't give you a lot of warning when they're going to attack either. So they're prehistoric looking fish with the head of an alligator and big old sharp teeth and the scales of a fish. And they're just like a pissed off bull underwater. They're just never in a happy mood.
Just another one of the obstacles, the challenges of the Texas water safari.
They're just a bonus, that's for sure.
Yeah, you don't have to pay extra for that. Now you hold one of the records for that race, don't you?
Yeah, one record. Alan Spels and I raced in the USCA C2 class in 1997. United States Canoe Association dictates a formula for how their race boats can be built, the dimensions. 18.5 feet long by 16-inch tall bow with an 11-inch tall stern and 3 feet at the midship, things like that. It dictates the size and shape of a boat so that when you're in a race, everybody's in the same boat, just like Formula NASCAR racing or whatever they call those things, and just so they kind of even out the odds. Well, this is just a carbon fiber canoe without a rudder, and we're using single blade paddles. And Alan and I, we were young at the time. I mean, this was 1997, and we were in pretty good shape, and we paddled in 36 hours and 27 minutes, I believe.
That's smoking.
It was a lot of fun. That was a big water year too. So we were just flying. It only took one night for us to do it. We finished about 9 p.m. on the second day, right around there.
We could spend a long time just talking about those races, but I want to get to another race that you did. What led you to the Great River Amazon Raft Race in Peru?
Yeah, that was funny. I guess we have that to blame for all these expeditions at this point. That was about when I was in the prime of my racing career, but I could also start feeling that, things were waning. After a while, no matter how successful you've been in the sport, age is going to catch up with you. And I was still feeling pretty good at that point. And my friend David Kelly was putting together a team. And David's renowned for not just being an amazing canoe and kayak racer, surf ski racer, outrigger racer, all the above, but an adventure racer. He kind of cut his teeth in the Eco Challenge world with all these multi-sport races around the world, Great Galois and all that. So David heard about this race down in Peru where you show up and then they give you 8 balsa logs to build a raft, and then you race it about 87 miles from the town of Nalca to the town of Iquitos, Peru, which is famous for being the world's most remote landlocked city. You can't get to it by road or railroad or anything. You have to fly in or go up the Amazon to get there. So Iquitos, they're holding this race to help promote, I guess, tourism, and the locals loved it. And another thing people outside of the region don't know is that people that live on the Amazon River are amazing paddlers. They build these paddles. Here's one of them, as a matter of fact, out of these roots of wood. I ended up with a few of them down there. And they're just basic paddles, but they're really well crafted out of machete and saws and whatnot. And these people grow up on the waterways, so they can't help but become really efficient paddlers, and they're very fast. If they ever found their way to the Amazon, to racing communities up there, they would change everything because they know what they're doing. So the Great River Amazon Raft Race, you bring 4 people down, you build your raft one day, and then you race it the next 3 days in different stages. So I'd never been outside of the United States at that point. I was 48 years old, I think, maybe 46, I don't recall. And I had to go get a passport. I got my first passport. And, I'd been to Mexico, but, that didn't really count in Texas because Texas and Mexico are a lot of the same thing here. And ended up flying down there. We had a plan to build this raft with our friends Mike and Carter. Carter Johnson was on the team, and Mike Scales from Hawaii. Mike's a champion outrigger racer, and Carter Johnson's holds several distance speed records in the canoe and kayak community. And so we all went down there. I just kind of joined at the last minute, enough time to get a passport, and we built our raft in an elongated way such that there was one person sitting behind the other. So all 4 of us were in line, which is how we have our racing boats in Texas. We have these long, skinny boats that are 45 feet long, and you put 6 people in them and 19-inch wide boat, and it's just a very efficient way to race. So we did the same thing. We glommed 2 of the 16-foot balsa logs together, and, we did it 4 times, and then we bolted it all and wired it all and tied it all together and painted it blue and to keep the water out as best we can because balsa absorbs water. And all the locals were laughing at us, because we're making this ridiculous-looking boat. And we're these ridiculous giants down there, too. We're just oversized people. And we took a lot longer to build our raft than they did. And the rafts down there are all, you put the logs one aside the other, so there are 8 logs, just beside each other. You lash them together, and you put 2 up front and 2 out back. So what we did was a little innovative, at least for them, not for us, but this is how we're used to, racing. Well, they literally laughed at us. They wouldn't talk to us, even though our Spanish was decent. In fact, we had 2 or 3 guys on our team and support group were very fluent in Spanish, but no one would talk to us because they thought we were so silly. Well, the gun went off the next morning, and we took off, and we were in the lead right away. And the first section was about 36 miles long, and we finished with a 6-minute lead on the defending champions, Los Invincibles, the local guys. And there's an $8,000 U.S. prize. The prize was $8,000 U.S. dollars. So it's a significant amount of money for anybody that lives on the Amazon in a village. No electricity or plumbing or anything. This is a big deal. And so we won, and then at that first checkpoint, the first stage, the next 2 teams said, well, we're going to take our raft apart and build it like these fellas here. That was against the rules. You couldn't change your raft once you started the race, and the officials wouldn't let these guys change it. So they quit. They just quit the race outright. And the next day, we got another 16-minute lead on the field, and then the final day, we got another 30-minute lead, and we ended up winning over an hour and a half or something like that. I can't remember the exact total, but we also set a new speed record for the race, and that record still holds to this day. So we still have that going. That was pretty exciting. We gave the money back to the next folks behind us in line. We distributed it amongst all the finishers. So, we didn't.
Oh, that's nice.
Well, they needed it more than we did. They have a tough existence down there. I mean, it's not like I'm wealthy or anything like that, but compared to those guys, I am. And, we weren't going to, it just didn't feel right. So we just gave it to them.
I can imagine in the race in the next year, everybody was probably copying your design.
I think now they have a rule against it. Actually, I think they after us, it's like, well, wait a minute, hold on, we didn't see this coming. So I think they all have to be the same type of construction at this point. But we still hold our record, and it's perfectly legal. So there you go.
There you go. Now, the problem is on the flight back, you found a book called Running the Amazon by Joe Kane. Tell us about that.
Yeah, you got it. Matter of fact, got it right here. David Kelly, and I'm blaming this all on David, lent me this book. I said, man, because I was just going on and on and on about the Amazon River down there. And because we hung out for a couple of weeks, and it just astounded me. The Amazon River isn't just the largest and longest river on the planet. It's the largest thing I have ever seen moving. And, I grew up south of Houston, between Houston and Galveston. So I've seen super tankers, and I've paddled next to them, the ship channel in Galveston and whatnot. I've seen some big moving things. And so if anybody has a chance to see the Amazon, it boggles your mind, because it's not this placid, easygoing river. It's hauling ass. I mean, it is fast, and it is big. I mean, it's a mile across, and it's moving. And any log in there, you could tell, or just seeing against the bank, that this thing is moving. It's just this volume that is moving at high speed, and it's obviously unstoppable. So it just blew me away. My sense of perceptions were blown away, and it was just beautiful also. It was just magnificent and beautiful. And David lent me the book, and I read it flying back between San Francisco and Texas. In fact, I had a layover in Phoenix where I just absorbed it with about 3 or 4 Jack and Cokes, maybe 5 or 6. I can't remember. After a while in an airport bar. But I just read the entire book right then and there. And I got off the plane in Austin, and my wife picked me up, and to her misfortune, I said, honey, I'm gonna paddle the Amazon River, the entire Amazon River. And I think she misunderstood me, because she said, well, you just did that. I said, no. We did 87 miles of it. There's another 4,000 behind that I'm going to do. What it told me, reading Joe Kane's incredibly well-written book about a 1987 expedition from what was then considered to be the source of the Amazon River, the detail in it was wonderful, and Joe's such a great writer. It also conveyed to me that the skills that I had at the time were right up there. I thought, well, I can do this. I can do this. I mean, that was the strangest thing that I came out of the book. It was like a little checklist of, oh, okay, I know how to do this. I know how to eat. I can paddle 260 miles. At that point, I'd done the MR 340 also. I can do 340 miles with nonstop. Surely I can paddle 4,000 miles if I stop every day to eat. I thought, what makes these guys any different from me? And it turns out that, and I didn't know. I mean, I didn't know Piotr Chmielewski at the time. I didn't know Joe. I didn't know any expedition paddlers. But I learned who they were, and I met a lot of them. And I figured, you know what? These are just guys like me that learned how to do this. And as simple as that sounds, that's what I did. I just read everything I could on it. I read about anybody that's kayaked or paddled the Amazon or rafted the Amazon or any other long rivers or across the ocean. John Turk, for instance. I just read what they did and learned and did what they did. I didn't reinvent the bicycle here. And from then I just started planning on going down the Amazon River.
But there's sort of a warning, though, from his book, and that is team dynamics. And what could happen under those harsh conditions?
Yeah, they had some trouble. And I urge anybody to read that book. It is probably one of the best expedition books out there. But the team is going to cause any expedition to sink or swim. And they had some, one guy in particular, but two or three guys that were, opposed to the other half of the team. And the team split when they're in the town of Atalaya that we spoke about earlier, where, Jason and Eric had their infamous evening. And so that actually helped me learn a lot about what it was to form a team. And I tried to avoid that whenever I was forming my team to go down the Amazon. I wasn't able to do that as well as I thought. I'm smarter now. I mean, there's so many variables that you have to take into, to keep in thought when you're bringing people down for such a large expedition. I'm a lot smarter now, and I made a lot of assumptions for the Amazon trip about some people I knew that weren't right. I mean, you really got to ask some deep, dark questions, and you got to get really pointed. Like, like for the Northwest Passage, I asked, there's no pooping in the tent. That's just where I draw the line. You're going to have to go outside. Little things like that are very important because it could really gnaw on one another.
Now, Wes, I'm going to ask you a lot of questions to talk to you about expedition planning. Probably towards the end, after we hear about the Amazon expedition, what was its purpose and goals in a nutshell?
Well, the Amazon, initially, my goal was to be the first person to paddle the Amazon River solo. Now, I had a team with me that I was just going to propel myself. So I thought, okay, if I'm only propelling myself, then I can fit the definition of paddling the Amazon solo, even though I had the support along the way. Well, that evolved. The more I learned about the whitewater section on the what was then considered to be the headwaters of the Amazon, it was going to be beyond my capability. So then I thought, well, I'm going to get as much whitewater kayak training as I can, and I did. I trained up here in the United States, and I got a great whitewater kayak sponsor with Jackson Kayaks, and did as much training as I could, but I was not going to be good enough to just go it alone. So then I found this great team of tigers to help me get down the river, and it was only a few months before, probably 6 months or so before we left, that some of the goals changed. Because instead of just being another trip down the Amazon, I was contacted by Dr. Rocky Contos, who was also doing some expeditions down there. He was going to be the first to paddle all 5 of the headwaters of the Amazon. He discovered that what was currently known as the headwaters of the Amazon wasn't the longest source of the Amazon after all. It was this other river called the Montaro River that was actually longer than the Apurimac River, or Apurimac. And so I thought, well, that's interesting, but I didn't give it a lot of validity or thought or concern until I started reading about what actually constitutes the source of a river. And it turns out there's no universal definition. You could go to any river and one will be a glacial source, another will be some lake, another will be a swamp. But the point is there's nothing that defined what the source of a river was. So I started paying a little more attention to what Rocky said and what he proposed to me. And he said, you ought to leave from this other source on the Montaro, because then you'll be the first to go from the most distant source of the Amazon. And it wasn't just by a few feet. It was about 90 miles, 70 to 90 miles. And I thought, wow, that's a big deal. So we shifted gears, and that's when National Geographic became interested. We said, okay, instead of this being this solo trip that I'm going to make supported by all these other great people, we're going to be a team that's going to be the first to go down the Amazon from its most distant source.
Yeah, and that's great geographical significance.
Oh, yeah, it was huge. And so I just got all the maps I could for that region and started doing the research for that. And we just shifted gear. We kept it really quiet because National Geographic wanted to be the first to announce it. And they gave us about $35,000 for the expedition, which was real helpful. It was about a third of what we needed. So, but it was a good chunk of money. And so that just changed everything. And I was no longer concerned about being a soloist necessarily. So it worked out really well with our whitewater team. We ended up calling the Tigers because, I wasn't proficient enough to solo kayak the Montaro River. There were class 5+ rapids in there, many of which had never been run. Rocky went ahead and he ran, all but this one little section of them before us. But this was some serious stuff. And I'm not one to make foolish choices or to do anything haphazardly or put myself in danger. So we had a raft, a support raft, and whenever we'd come up to a really bad rapid or a section, then one of the kayakers would get in my kayak, and I would jump in that support raft, and we'd run it safely. Then I'd get back in the kayak. So we alternated back and forth that way. And luckily, my skills increased a little bit better throughout that 500-mile trip down the Montaro. So by the time I got to the end, I was running some pretty serious rapids, luckily with a bunch of, very safety-conscious kayakers around me.
Well, take us to the source. If we were standing there with you, what would we see?
Tell you what, we missed the source by about 4 miles. Rocky was still doing his research. He needed some more time with the computers and with this satellite mapping and all this to determine whether this one feeder stream was the actual longer than this other one. And we ended up going down the Rio Gashan because he had a general idea at the time that was probably the longest. And so from Lago Acucocha. So we said, okay, well, we're running out of time. We got to get this thing done now. We're just going to go from what you think is the best, and hopefully it's the longest. Well, the most distant source is still out there, people. It's down this other river. It's 4 miles longer than from where we departed. Well, we didn't know that until a year later. But anyway, so our source of the Amazon, which you could see from the other source pretty much, it's just over a hill. It's barren of trees because we're well above the tree line. It's 14,800 feet in the central Peruvian Andes. So the air is extremely thin. I mean, just think of Colorado. We climbed these 14,000 footers. Well, this is where we drove. I mean, we were way up there. The air is thin as hell. It's cold, obviously. We had blizzard conditions. I mean, whiteout blizzard conditions.
There was one photograph or video I saw where you're kayaking and there's all kinds of snow just piling up on you guys as you're going down a little creek.
It wasn't Central Texas, and so we got a little education on high altitude expeditions. It was hard to breathe. The water was shallow, so kayaking was just shoving our way along these rocks. Yeah, we had to stop paddling the first day because we couldn't see because of the whiteout conditions. I mean, the snow was coming in sideways. Cold as hell. We had to go back and set our camp up again and hunker down and get warm. And the next day, everything was fine and we were able to progress. But that blizzard was that was a little different than what we're used to here in Texas. But it's absolutely beautiful, as you can well imagine. There are sheep farms that are sparsely populated. There are fenced areas. The water you can just drink the water because it's all snow and glacier melt. It's just clean and pure. The people are really sweet. Quechua people aren't very talkative, but they'd give you the shirt off their back. They were very helpful for us, finding the way and telling us stories. And what little Quechua we learned and what little Spanish they knew, we were able to communicate pretty well. But it's the top of the world. I mean, for South America, it's just a beautiful place to go. The stars are, unfettered with any city lights. It's a lot like West Texas, but all the stars are in the wrong place because we're in the southern hemisphere. Really had a difficulty locating the constellations down there, and they weren't in the north. So, but it's ichu grass kind of covered the area. No plants other than the little ichu grass, and you can just see for miles and miles without anything in your way. And the snow-capped mountains, the cold, clear water. and the quietness it's neat to get up in the morning and you could hear every little bird, and it was just crystal quiet. And I just loved it.
The Tigers, who were they?
Oh man, these guys were great. Well, Juanito de Ugarte was a guy I met through another kayaker, and Juanito was from Cusco, and his father is a famous Peruvian kayaker and water runner, very well known, and his whole family has been running rivers since Juanito was born. I mean, he grew up on the rivers there, so Juanito knew everything about every river. He'd never run the Montaro. In fact, no one really had. And so my wife and I were on vacation the year before when I went down there to scout out the areas. It was a honeymoon. It was our anniversary. I told her, honey, let's go to Peru. Oh, while we're here, we need to go look at these rivers.
She's going, wait a minute. That wasn't on the brochure.
Yeah, my long-suffering and very tolerant wife. But anyway, so we were down there, and we met with Juanito, and we had lunch, and we talked about some plans, and he was all for it. It looked like it was going to work out all right. I wasn't going to be able to pay anybody. I mean, I was raising this money by hook or crook. And we had some really nice donors, but nothing. We didn't have a unicorn by any means. These were people that were giving me hundreds of dollars or even tens of dollars. And then the rest I was, building some things and trying to raise the money on my own. So I couldn't pay anybody, and I made that clear to Juanito right off the bat, but he was in for it anyway, as long as we could pay their way. I paid for hotels and food and got the kayaks, and I left him with all the kayaks when we were leaving because he was running a guide business. So Juanito said, well, I'll see about getting a team together. And over the next year, he pulled together some guys, world-renowned whitewater badasses. Rafa Ortiz and Tino Speck and a bunch of other guys, some local guys, and they all, graciously came together. They all knew each other, which was really helpful. Just to watch my ass, and they tolerated my lack of skills, and they Juanito tested me out a few times. My roll wasn't good, and then my roll was okay, but then on about a week into the expedition, I tore my rotator cuff. No, actually, the third day. Now that I remember it was the third day. I tore my rotator cuff. I didn't tell anybody except for David Kelly, who was our team manager down there in the Andes. And I took a bunch of Advil and hydrocodone, and I just kind of kept going for the next 3 months. And it screwed up my roll. I couldn't roll, and Juanito figured that out when we were going into a canyon, and I tumped over and I ended up having to bail out, which is just a disgraceful thing to do for a kayaker. And so he pulled me off the side when we were starting to set up camp, and he said, let me see your roll. And I ended up having to roll, and the third time I couldn't get – then there were ugly rolls. Third time I couldn't even roll up. And he said, okay. And he got an idea of where I was. But it didn't stop us. He just said, I just know what I'm dealing with now. And he was right. I mean, he was in charge of our whitewater section. And so from then on, he limited what water I was going to be kayaking solo through. And I listened to him and did exactly what he told me. And I rafted when he told me and kayaked when he told me. So it worked out okay.
All with a very painful shoulder.
It hurt. It really did hurt. And I had to, once I got on the flat water, it wasn't so bad. And I had to kind of alter my stroke quite a bit, not to raise my shoulder, it was my left shoulder. And I just ate a lot of ibuprofen throughout the next 3 months or 111 days that we did the expedition.
It was funny when I read that, I had a flashback way back in the day. I was it was a short adventure race, but on the finish, we had to go across the lake, and this big old storm came in. We had to go in the teeth of it, and we were on those inflatable kayaks, which, aren't any good at all. So it's getting tossed around. Yeah. And so we're just pulling and pulling. And we make it to the finish. And unbeknownst to me, I had screwed up my scapula. And the next morning, I had what was called a winging scapula. And instead of laying flat against your back, it was pointed backwards.
Oh, you had a fin. You had a dorsal fin.
It was the freakiest thing. I'm looking back going, I go to the doctor and he goes, you got a winging scapula. And nobody's ever seen one this bad before. and so they get it all back. But the problem was 4 or 5 months later, I did the Eco Challenge. And I didn't tell my teammates about it. So every pull of the stroke on one side was just like a knife going in.
Wow.
And so I was, when you were describing the pain that you're having to go through because of your shoulder, it was just, PTSD flashbacks on that part.
Well, it wasn't my first shoulder tear. I'd been through surgeries before, so I recognized exactly what it was, and I knew somewhat how to avoid making it worse. And that was my biggest trigger was, okay, it's still together. I can feel that. But more, man, I can't lose whatever thread is still holding on to that thing. And luckily, once I got down to flat water, we were able to switch to sea kayaks, and it was a little bit easier to manage at that point.
Now, describe the rapids there on Montaro, especially there was one that you pointed out called the Tiger Tooth Rapid.
Right. That was the first really, really big one. It's in Itzkuchaka Canyon. Well, we called it Itzkuchaka Canyon because it's a very narrow canyon just upriver from the little town of Itzkuchaka. Once again, still high up in the Montaro River, about 150 miles down from the source. Tiger Tooth Rapid named it for two reasons. There's a peak that's right next to it that kind of looks like a sharp tiger tooth, but also we named it in homage to our tigers, the guys that were with us, the whitewater team. It's a fairly non-runnable rapid. James Contos had come through there, a month or two before us and was with his solo partner, and there were two solo kayaks, and his partner ran it and made it somehow. And James or Rocky Contos ran it and ended up with a yard sail. His kayak went one way, he got caught in a hydraulic and separated and made it out alive barely, but he was separated from his kayak, his gear, he lost his computer, he lost everything, and he's just by himself now, and he drags himself out and ends up hiking out of the Andes to the nearest road. The police, I think 3 days later, he was getting with the police. They helped him find his kayak, but it was just a mess. So we weren't going to run it. Pulled up there with the tigers. We had our raft, our kayaks, and we looked at it, and they just said, yeah, they weren't going to even run it. I mean, that's where I gained a lot of respect for the tigers, not for what they could do, but for the safety that they took upon themselves. They just said, yeah, you might be able to make it. It's not worth it. We're going to port it to this. And we lined the raft through and got down at the bottom. That's when things got exciting.
Return for part 2 when West and his team descend to the Amazon's infamous Red Zone. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you down the road when we get together again, share a glass of whiskey, and hear more stories of adventure as told by those who live them. Until then, check us out at michaeljreinhart.com, where you'll find more of my work as an adventure photojournalist. Photos, videos, and articles of interesting people, mysterious places, and exotic cultures from the wild places of the world.